How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Taped Podcast, the illest podcast in the world, where your host is always myself, MickyT.
Me, Nostalgia.
And welcome back to another edition of the Worst to Best series. But as always, we have our guest on here with us. She is a regular on the podcast, appeared on a few episodes in the past. Most recently in the Talking Heads Worst to Best, and she's also a patron on our Patreon.
Ooh.
And it is the one and only Aubrey, aka SLUG BAIT.
Yeah. Nice.
Nice.
Jokes all jokes aside, I'm really glad to be back. It's been far too long since I've been on, and I'm just glad to make your guys' acquaintance. So let's go ahead and start the episode.
Fuck yes. And today's Worst to Best is going to be on one of the most innovative and influential groups of in hip-hop history, to say the least. Short enough discography, but very impactful. And we're, of course, talking about the one and only Beastie Boys.
Ooh,
Hells
fuck
yeah.
yeah.
Big hype. I've been very excited to do this one for a while. Beastie Boys have been slowly but surely becoming one of my favorites. So, yeah, I guess just enough waffling. Do you want to get right into it?
Fuck yeah.
Alright, so also, just for reference, we're not going to be including the mix-up, so we only have about 7 projects here. Everything from their debut, Ill Communication, all the way up to their final album, The Hot Sauce Committee Part 2. And, yeah. Alright, starting at our number 7 picks, I chose The Hot Sauce Committee Part 2.
I chose To the Five Boroughs.
I also chose To the Five Boroughs.
Okay, I'll take it first then.
Yeah. Normal order.
So, the final Beastie Boys album also happens to be my least favorite Beastie Boys album. And that's not to say that it's a bad album or anything like that, but for me, this album is just the most underwhelming that the boys have ever sounded, and it's not really an album that I enjoy all that much, apart from a few songs. The Hot Sauce Committee Part 2 is like a culmination of the sonic ideas and sounds that the Beastie Boys did on albums like Ill Communication and Hello Nasty, except this time they kind of incorporate more modern production, and I will say, after about 10 years, this album has aged pretty well production-wise, and I can applaud this album for that, but when it comes to the actual performances and the songs themselves, the album just really falls flat on its face, in my opinion. It's mostly because a lot of the ideas that the Beasties attempt on this record really just, I don't know, they just sound kind of half-baked and bland. There's instrumentals that just feel kind of stiff and lackluster, maybe a bit too clean sounding, and it doesn't help that there are a lot of performances from the Beasties that don't really sound that good either, whether it be because of the rough vocals or the rapping. Lyrics and skits don't come off as well as I would like, sometimes to the point where it's just kind of unlikable, and I feel like Beastie's performances are, I don't know, they haven't really maintained that sense of charisma or chemistry that they normally had in their previous work. Don't really have much else to say about it. I don't really find much about it memorable. I can find it respectable, given that it's the last Beastie Boys album we'll ever get, but it sucks that I couldn't enjoy it more, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I went with their second last project, To the Boroughs, and for me this was just a very easy pick for my least favourite Beastie Boys album. It just, for me, does so little. It tries so little, it tries nothing new, and even despite it mostly just being kind of a vanilla East Coast hip-hop project, the band seldom even, manages to hit that nail on the head. The instrumentation here is just pretty damn dull. It's very sparse, and the soundscapes just aren't as flavorful as they were on a lot of the band's previous albums. It just all comes together and sounds quite bland. The energy and playfulness that the band presented on their previous records just isn't really allowed to shine on here, and the album ends up, in my opinion, sounding quite robotic. And the boys also don't really salvage much with the rappings. The vocals here are just kind of shittily mixed, and memorable one-liners are very, very scarce, especially given context that this is a Beastie Boys record. Everything just sounds as uninspired as the instrumentals. It's not a great record, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very nothing album for me. I was gonna start this off with just reading from the Wikipedia just as a joke, but I don't even think that it's worth wasting a bit on just it's like you said, it's very sparse. It like in terms of instrumentation, it's very dull, almost uninspired. Just I, it's just not. I'm not a big fan of it, and it's. I understand that they were trying to take a more serious approach, considering that it reflects on September 11th and all that, but it just doesn't feel like it does. I don't know. It doesn't feel like a proper Beastie Boys record because it seems so dull and uninspired, and just it lacks the flavor that their early stuff has so much of. And I feel like that's all I can really say on it. It's just a very nothing album to me. So
it's understandable.
No point wasting time on our least favorite ones.
Yeah.
All right,
Let's move on.
All right, best and worst tracks. Favorite tracks from Hot Sauce Committee Part 2 are Make Some Noise, Nonstop Disco, Powerback, and here's a little something for you. Worst track is Lee Major's Come Again.
My favorite track on To the Five Boroughs is Triple Trouble. My least favorite track is Shazam.
My two favorite tracks were Check It Out, Trouble, and so probably be. Yeah, I remember the other ones. So,
Fair enough. And with that, we're moving on to our number 6 picks, and I chose To the Five Boroughs.
I chose Hot Sauce Committee Part 2.
I also chose Hot Sauce Committee Part 2.
The switcheroo. To say that the To the Five Boroughs isn't one of Beastie Boys' shining moments would be putting it pretty lightly. In fact, it's one of their weaker moments in their discography, and it's a record that, for the most part, is kinda admirable for what it tries to do differently, but ultimately it fails in being outstanding in their discography. It's not actually a bad album, but to me the problem with To the Five Boroughs is that it kind of feels so rushed, sloppy, and watered down for a Beastie Boys album. It has some good highlights on it, and it starts really well with the first 2 tracks, but after that it just becomes a bit of a boring listen. The group decides to ditch the more like intricate and dense part of their work and instead go in a more simplistic sound and at times go back to their somewhat 80s roots. But something just feels really off. Like it doesn't really have the same flair that makes the Beasties' production so amazing on their previous albums. It doesn't really have the intricacies or even just the playfulness that it has. It's just, like Mihao said previously, just very sparse and just very dull. You know, I can kind of respect that decision, but it just doesn't really lend well. It just kind of seems rushed in that respect. Especially since a lot of Beastie Boys' least charismatic performances turn up on this album. It's also one of the first instances where the Beastie Boys got blatantly political with a lot of lyrics on this album going over kind of post 9/11 Bush era politics. I'll give it credit where it's due and say it's cool to see that side of the Beastie Boys rather than what we're used to. But in turn, the same chemistry and flair that they bring to their performances is just not there for me. And it doesn't help that they're backed by just really weak instrumentals. Track list itself, obviously I said the first 2 tracks are pretty good, but it kind of flip-flops between just being, serviceable, but then just like blech, like nothing that good. It's really inconsistent. And with that, I have nothing else to say about To the Five Boroughs. It's just not that great, and to be honest, while there are tracks that I like, it's very inconsistent.
We did a switcheroo. I went with the band's most recent project, Hot Sauce Committee Part 2. So late into their career and based solely off how safe the Beastie Boys played it when it came to the previous album, To the Five Boroughs, I cannot really blame myself for being a little worried with the band's final album. I was kind of worried that it would also be just another instance of the boys kind of shooing things in and playing things too safe. But despite me not really loving this album, I do have to give it some credit where it's due. I think the band really tried to explore something interesting with the sound of this album. It's very heavily electronic, it's noisy, it's abrasive, and the boys do deliver some absolutely banging tracks over this very aggressive backdrop. But despite it being the group's swan song and despite me, respecting the direction the group took things in instrumentally, it does really kind of fail to click overall. The tracks throughout, while never weak, are also not going to be what comes to mind when I recollect my favorite cuts from the band's discography, and the project again falls kind of into a trap of being very front heavy, something that is kind of a reoccurring theme with the band for me. But I do still think this album is solid. It's worth listening to if you're a Beastie Boys fan, especially since it's their last project. And yeah, I think it's a very, very much serviceable album, but there's nothing that really draws me towards it further.
Yeah, I mean it's a late era Beastie Boys record. All you really need to know about it. It is a little bit better than To the Five Boroughs, to be fair. It's with the electro sort of experimentation and just that sort of direction, so props to them for experimenting and trying out a new sound. Unfortunately, it will be the last Beastie Boys record we get due to MCA's unfortunate death in 2012, and which is very sad, but it's just an okay album. It's nothing spectacular. There are some good cuts on here, like Make Some Noise and Lee Majors Come Again, and mostly their singles that came out. But other than that, it's not really my cup of tea. Like I said, it's just not. It's not my favorite Beastie Boys record by any means, but I do prefer it somewhat to the Five Boroughs, and that's all I really have to say about that.
All right. That in mind, my favorite tracks from To the Five Boroughs are Check It Out, Right Now, and An Open Letter to NYC. Worst track is Crawl Space.
My favorite tracks on Hot Sauce Committee Part 2 are Non-Stop Disco Powerback and Too Many Rappers. My least favorite track is Crazy Ass Shit.
My favorite tracks were Make Some Noise, Don't Play No Game That I Can't Win, Too Many Rappers, and Lee Majors Come Again. And my least favorite was probably Funky Donkey.
They really tried to do another Funky Monkey. We know what you did. Anyways, moving on to our number 5 picks, and I chose Check Your Head.
I chose License to Ill.
I also chose License to Ill.
Alright, same order.
You're leaving me in the dark here, fuck. Alright, so, Check Your Head is actually a pretty beloved album in Beastie Boys' discography, and from a lot of lists that I've seen and some of the rankings and retrospectives I've watched, this album gets rated very highly amongst fans of the group. This is where my list differs with a lot of fans, because I think Check Your Head is a pretty flawed album. It's solid, don't get me wrong, but I just find the album to be a bit hard to sit through for a couple of reasons. What I can praise this album for, though, is for its production, which is pretty damn good across the board. Ad Rock, MickyT, and MCA still sound pretty good across the board, and there's some great classic songs in Beastie Boys' catalog here, and they still kick ass to this day. There's even a few deeper cuts that are really great as well. Also, Check Your Head marks the point where the band started to expand their sound way more. They go into territory that feels a bit more jammy, and that's due in part to the band's embrace of live instruments once again, which they hadn't done since their early punk EPs and demos. The Beastie Boys embrace embrace plenty of styles in this sort of subtly experimental way, all of which they'd done to some capacity before, whether that be traditional sample heavy hip hop, their kind of signature brand of rap rock, funk, and they even kind of return to those punk roots that I mentioned. But even with that, Check Your Head does have problems, and one of the biggest ones for me is that it's really bloated. I find there's a bit of filler on this album that isn't really all that memorable or exciting. The extended interludes and instrumentals on this album have their moments, but not all of them really stick for me. And personally, I think that the band did this kind of mix of sounds and jams way better on the album that follows it, Ill Communication. I'd say if they trimmed the fat on Check Your Head, which is definitely a lot towards the back end, then I'd probably rate this album higher. But unfortunately, it's not really the case for me. Check Your Head has its standout moments for sure, but I think the group did this sound way better down the line. And yep, it's bloated.
Yeah, I went with License to Ill, the band's debut, and in a lot of ways the band's most commercially successful and iconic album. And in my opinion, it's a tad bit overrated. I know, most Beastie Boys fans don't hold this project to the high regard they do some of their later albums. But the fact that this has, become as iconic of an album as it is still kind of warrants the overrated tag somewhat. Aside from tracks like, obviously the outstanding Fight for Your Right or No Sleep Till Brooklyn, this album just really doesn't do that much interesting. It definitely established Beastie Boys quite well as this kind of in-your-face, bombastic, braggadocious rap trio. But their sound just isn't refined here in any way, in my opinion. The production is, in a lot of ways, the real selling point for me personally with the Beastie Boys. And it just isn't at the level here as it is on some of the band's future releases. For me, it's just kind of far too on the nose with the samples. Like the track Rhyming and Stealing just isn't as meticulously crafted from its sample as any of the material on Paul's Boutique, for example. And the lyrics a lot of the time are just a little too corny, even by Beastie Boys standards. There's plenty of fun corniness on here, but the tracks like She's Crafty or Girls just do absolutely nothing to me. For me, there's plenty of fantastic moments and plenty of very important moments in the band's discography here, but it just isn't great or even all that good of an album in my opinion. It's kind of okay at best, and that's just my opinion.
Damn, someone doesn't know how to have fun.
I do with their later albums.
Lame.
I mean, it's an extremely important album, but it's not the best Beastie Boys album. Like, you can turn this album on at a party, and people would fucking, like, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, Fight for Your Right, Brass Monkey, even Paul Revere, which isn't my favorite, but a lot of people seem to like it, so, like, it just... People can get down to this album, which is very rare for a mid to late 80s. Like a mid 80s rap album. So to be fair, that kind of shows how important it is and like how a lot of people seem to still really love it. But it doesn't do a whole lot for me, even though I like it. Rhymin' and Stealin's pretty good, even though, like Nostalgia said, the samples do get a little bit on the nose, but I think it's got charm to it, so... there are some very sus moments on the album too, which, I don't know, the line about how I forgot who said it, but the guy who said he said something along the lines of, all the girls I like are underage, which is, very not good. And then some other, girls, that's just girls. That's all I really have to say. But it's an okay album. It's definitely, the production's a little bit dated, I guess I could say. In terms of, the Rollins. Oh my god.
What the fuck was that?
That's my guinea pig. Oh my god. Anyways, yeah. But I think it's cool that the Kerry King from Slayer did this solo to No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Is that it?
That's all. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I gotta say.
All right. Your guinea pig can be our fourth member here. How about that?
Hell yeah. Moki Bear. Moki. Come here.
Oh boy.
He's...
That's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
We'll just move on with it. We don't need to distract. So my favorite tracks from Check Your Head are Pass the Mic, Gratitude, and So What You Want. My least favorite track is Mark on the Bus. Where's Mark going?
My favorite tracks on License to Ill are Fight for Your Right and No Sleep Till Brooklyn. My least favorite tracks are She's Crafty and Girls.
My favorite songs from License to Ill, Rhymin' and Stealin', Fight for Your Right, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, and Brass Monkey. And my least favorite track was Girl.
All right, we're moving on to our number 4 picks, and I chose License to Ill.
I chose Hello Nasty.
I chose Check Your Head.
All right.
Finally,
I was a little worried.
Exactly.
I was a little worried that we both picked Check Your Head, but
Yeah.
It's about time we
All
had
right.
some fucking deviation. Let's go.
No.
Anyways, License to Ill was the record that pretty much put the Beastie Boys on the map during the mid-80s. Before that, they were just like this normal New York punk band, but once they started doing more hip-hop, they really took off, and safe to say it worked well for them, at least, since License to Ill was actually the first hip-hop project to ever top the Billboard charts, and it's fairly iconic even to this day. And yeah, like there are many reasons why this album in particular was the first hip-hop album to hit number 1, but in context of the music and what the Beasties did on this album, it makes sense, and for who it was appealing to, it makes sense. It's not a perfect album, but it is an album that I do think is pretty fun. I do get some enjoyment out of it. Despite my enjoyment, I will definitely note what knocks this album in terms of like my enjoyment. Firstly, this album, yeah, it's dated in a lot of ways. A lot of 80s rap albums are dated. The Beastie Boys kind of flows and are pretty much the default rap flows at points. A lot of the lyrics on this album just range from blatant misogyny to moments that are just like, why the fuck did you say this? Also, it's an album that really doesn't showcase what the Beastie Boys were capable of, knowing what they went on to do after this point. There's hints of it with some of the production and some of the sample choices, but that's really it. But I do have fun with a lot of the songs in this album. There's some absolutely great, catchy, fun songs all over this album, despite how fratty some of them are. It's dumb, fun party music, and at the end of the day, I had fun with some fun, dumb, fun party music. The production in this album has moments that I genuinely really like, despite some of the more simplistic moments, and I understand like the criticism that the sample choices are, you know, very on the nose and whatever, but honestly, I think there's a charm to it. And, you know, some of the artists that they chose to sample blatantly are fairly bold. Like, come on, Black Sabbath, The Clash, AC/DC, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Led Zeppelin 3 fucking times. I think I really like Ad Rock, Mike D, and MCA's chemistry. And, you know, they're kind of loud, obnoxious, like, in a good way, deliveries suit the music. And there's plenty of fun classics and deep cuts to be found in this record that I really mess with. Also, I should really fucking hate tracks like Girls and Brass Monkey, but I can't. They're dumb as fuck, and I can't help but love them, to be honest. Yeah, License to Ill isn't one of my favourite Beastie Boys records, but it's still a pretty fun one at that. It's dated in some areas for sure, but where it thrives in its catchiness and the chemistry that the Beasties display, it really works. It basically boils down to 3 lads talking shite and partying. They fought for the right to do it, and they are certainly doing it on this album, and I'm fine with that. All in all, I think it's pretty enjoyable.
Nice.
Yeah, I went with Hello Nasty, which is a decent album with some absolutely fantastic highs. However, I feel like ultimately it almost lets itself down quite a bit. The album follows in the experimental and massively eclectic footsteps of the band's 2 previous albums. And once again, the band produced some absolutely fantastic cuts from a vibrant and exciting array of genres, ideas, samples, and influences. And when things click on tracks like, you know, the obvious Intergalactic, for example, the music here is just brilliant. But while the band's previous 3 records were virtually without a dull moment, there's tracks on here that just really have me shrugging my shoulders and thinking, nothing really special. And especially during the back end of this album, the whole thing just kind of becomes routine. It's, again, very much front heavy, and it's an issue that is made very, very much more apparent when, you know, you take into consideration how unnecessary long this project is. So yeah, I mean, there's enough good material on here to, you know, have really made the project quite great. But, you know, with so many deep cuts that just do absolutely nothing for me, you know, the ambition prevalent on those cuts, for example, just is nowhere near as, you know, good as it was on tracks like, again, Intergalactic, for example, or Sneaking Out the Hospital. This thing could have easily just been trimmed, and the better tracks could have easily made a very, very solid album, but instead we get something that's ultimately a bit of a slog to get through.
Yeah, Check Your Head is where Check Your Head is where the Beasties sort of start going into the like funk rock era, because a lot of the albums, you know, obviously a lot of their albums in the 90s have a lot more live instrumentation and more just experimenting with genres, be it punk or funk or whatever. I mean, I think it's a pretty good album. It does feel a little bloated in terms of the back end. Just, I don't know. Some stuff just isn't as memorable as some of the stuff on the front half, but it does have its fair share of great songs. Jimmy James, Pass the Mic, Gratitude, Finger Licking Good, So What You Want. And even some of the instrumentals are pretty good too, like Pow and Namaste. But for the most part, it's a pretty good album. Kind of like what Nostalgia said about Hello Nasty. It can get a little bit of a slog to get through after the highlights, but for the most part, it's a solid album overall, and definitely one definitely like a good one in terms of the golden age sort of era for Beastie Boys in the 90s and stuff like that. But yeah. And I think it's interesting too because I'm on the Wikipedia page now, and it's got the progressive rap tag under genres. So that's it's pretty. I mean, I wouldn't consider it that, but it's a pretty neat label to have on a Beastie Boys record.
Wow, it's not even a genre tag on RYM. Let's go.
Maybe they might be ahead of the game on something right here. No, but honestly, that's all I really got to say about Check Your Head. Not my favorite, but not my least favorite.
Alright, so with that in mind, my favorite tracks from License to Ill are Rhymin' and Stealin', Fight for Your Right, and No Sleep Till Brookhill, okay.
Brooklyn.
My least favorite track is Posse in Effect. I am very sorry, it is too hot here.
Yeah. My favorite tracks are Intergalactic and Sneaking Out the Hospital. My least favorite track is And Me.
My favorite tracks are Jimmy James, Pass the Mic, So What You Want, and Live at PJ's. And my least favorite would probably be, I don't know, Professor Booty. I'm not a big fan of that one.
Alright, we're in the top 3 now, and in my opinion, my third pick is Hello Nasty.
My third pick is Check Your Head.
My third pick is also Hello Nasty.
Agreement!
I'll go last, so in that case.
Alright. So, Hello Nasty, in my opinion, is one of the most overlooked albums in Beastie Boys' discography. Admittedly, with more listens, I've picked up on some of its flaws, but I still think that it's a great album, and it's one of the more experimental and sonically interesting albums that the Beasties have ever made, in my opinion, especially in their 90s era. A lot of the album's formula and ideas that the group were incorporating on albums beforehand do carry over in this album, like the more instrumental jams and lengthy track lists, but this time they took a new sonic approach that featured a lot of really psychedelic textures, electronic production, trippy ideas, and a lot of these kind of unique creative detours. It's a really unique take on the Beastie Boys sound, and that unique take is actually fantastic to me, especially when a lot of the material on this album is as great as it is, and especially with how incredible the production is across this album. It is far and away one of the best produced Beastie Boys albums ever. The production across this album is just so crisp, and the group applies so many odd and unique textures across what they explore, and it's actually insane to me. There isn't a single track in this album that I think was underwhelming or weak in terms of production, And the production lends itself well to the instrumentals, which are also fantastic. If I could describe the way that this album sounds, I'd just straight up say just kind of like psychedelic space rap. Even to this day, it kind of sounds futuristic, and it's just such a unique album in 90s hip-hop for me. The track list finds a really nice balance between the bangers and the more mellow tracks, and it allows for some diversity. It has a decent pace and some really decent experimentation from the group. The lads, of course, give some of their signature goofy, personality-driven performances and great chemistry, with little in the way of any blunders in the rapping, in my opinion. They even try to step out their comfort zone of being a little more melodic than what they're normally used to, which I can respect. As far as songs go, Hello Nasty, should I say, there's so many amazing cuts, both popular and deep cuts. I love so many songs in this album, some of which rank among some of my favorite Beastie Boys songs. I'll mention them when we get to best and worst tracks, but if I would mention one, I would mention a load of them, but I've narrowed it down to 3. The main gripe that I have with Hello Nasty, though, is that it's definitely bloated. I won't disagree, it definitely needs to be trimmed down. It's Beastie Boys' longest album with 22 tracks, and it is very demanding, especially with how slow-paced and surreal that it gets towards the back end. Plus, there are tracks that are kind of forgettable, but even the amount of amazing tracks that I love from this album are enough to suffice. So yeah, all in all, I love Hello Nasty. I think it goes underrated in general, and while it's not perfect, it's one of the Beastie Boys' best records, hands down, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very unique record in their discography in terms of, I mean, there's even, like, if I recall correctly, like a really folky kind of song. I forget how it is, but like, yeah.
There is a folky song on there.
Yeah. I forget which one it is, though, but it's a very record discography. It sounds so futuristic with songs like Intergalactic, which, I mean, yeah, it's like space rap. It's a pretty good term to use for this because it just sounds so forward thinking and old school at the same time, and it's not to mention just fucking fun as hell, like Super Disco Breakin', The Move, Just a Test, Body Movin', Intergalactic, 3 MCs and 1 DJ, which I think is awesome because I don't know the story behind it, but it's, I don't know, Mixmaster Mike's beat on there is fucking nuts. Yeah, it's just huge props to them for trying out a lot of new sounds. It's not as funk rocky as, say, Check Your Head or Ill Communication. They sort of decide to go in different directions, I think, while still incorporating those sort of sounds in the record. But I think it's a very underrated record, despite being, you know, a common theme with certain Beastie Boys records being that it is, you know, you could trim the fat a little bit, but for the most part, it's an extremely enjoyable album, and I definitely think that it deserves to be in my top 3.
I went with Check Your Head. When compared to a lot of the band's discography, I think Check Your Head definitely stands out as being a little out there. The boys really just took some creative liberty instrumentally here. A lot of the tracks are more winding and progressive than what one may expect from the group, and the sound palette here is really quite eclectic. There's influences from the likes of funk, jazz, and even psychedelia to some extent. Vocally, I think this album is also a lot more sparse. Still very much a hip-hop project, but I think the boys opened up a lot more to just, you know, kind of taking the back seat with their rhymes and letting the music and instrumentals build up and speak for themselves. The production here is fantastic, as tends to be with a lot of the golden era Beastie Boys albums, and I genuinely think it lives up to the best in their discography. But I do have one complaint, and that is that the slow building sound of this album does kind of enable some more boring, stretched out moments. But I do think that the majority of Check Your Head is exciting, it's fresh, and it's a welcome yet not really far-reaching deviation from the band's previous sound. And yeah, it's an album that I very much enjoy, and I do think it's among the boys' best album. Boys' best album.
That was a mouthful, wasn't it?
That boys' best albums.
Yay, you did it.
English, dude.
Okay, with that in mind, my favorite tracks from Hello Nasty are Remote Control, Body Moving, the standard version, and the Fatboy Slim remix, which is fucking awesome. And Intergalactic. My least favorite track is Flower Pose.
Who goes next?
Oh, that's me.
Yeah, you go.
My favorite tracks off of Hello Nasty were Super Disco Breakin', The Move, Remote Control, Just a Test, Body Moving, Intergalactic. And my least favorite would probably be in 3M Season 1 DJ 2. And my least favorite would probably be Song for the Man. It doesn't do a lot for me.
All right, and now we're moving on to the final two on our lists. And it's pretty much been narrowed down to the same two albums, so we'll see where this goes. And with that in mind, my number 2 pick is Ill Communication.
My number 2 pick is Paul's Boutique.
Wow.
I got Ill Communication.
All right.
I'll go last again.
Aubrey's got my back. Let's go. All right. I somewhat spoiled my opinions on Ill Communication when I was talking about Check Your Head earlier on. It is in many ways Check Your Head Part 2 sonically and structurally, but in many ways I think Ill Communication is a much better and refined album than the former, and in my opinion that makes Ill Communication hit harder, feel much more fluid and consistent, and overall I think it's one of the group's best. There's no doubt in my mind. I love this album. Like I mentioned, Beastie Boys make a very similar album to Check Your Head sonically and structurally. They pull from a lot of influences that stem from all over the place, whether it be in the form of hip-hop, hardcore punk, funk, psychedelia, and so on. They're present and pretty all over the place fashion with the amount that's packed in here, and it features a lot of these extended interlude-ish tracks and jammy moments, but barely any of the problems that I had with those kinds of moments on Check Your Head are present here for me. Maybe a couple of filler tracks, but that could have been trimmed, which is, a bit of a trend in a lot of Beastie Boys albums. But outside of that, virtually nothing else. I think this album is fantastic. This is a strong album from the Beastie Boys, so strong that it's, in fact, one of their best albums. Despite how all over the place stylistically this album is, similar to Check Your Head, it feels so much more refined and consistent. The sense of fluidity is really shining through. And as it goes on, it remains exciting. Even the jammier moments and the more instrumental-based songs are exciting. Like, fuck me, some of them are actually incredible. The production on this album is fantastic. Beastie Boys in this era rarely disappoint when it came to the production, and Ill Communication is no different, since it sounds impeccable from front to back. While it may not be as groundbreaking as Paul's Boutique, I'd argue that it's just as intricate, as dense, and as fun. The sounds of this album are well crafted and refined, with a truly impressive sound palette that never really fails to amaze me. The funk-tinged and psychedelic tracks are incredible, the grooves and bass lines are impeccable. I love a lot of the more out-there ideas on the instrumental front, particularly on the album's second half, and the quality never really stops in my opinion. Ad Rock, MickyT, and MCA deliver on a lot of sharp, killer, personality-driven and great performances all over this thing. They don't really sound like they're taking a backseat to the instrumentals, and they make for some great tracks. On top of that, the group is writing some of their best tracks ever on this album, like the iconic Sabotage and Get It Together with Q-Tip, which is amazing. One of my favorite hip-hop songs of the 90s. Like I said, there definitely could have been some fat cut from this album, since it is a bit bloated, admittedly, but outside of that, I think that this record doesn't have any other flaws. This thing is fantastic, and it's got one of the most consistent track lists of any Beastie Boys album, in my opinion. It's one of my favorites in their discography. I love this album, but there's just one I prefer.
Yeah, it's a case of pitting two fantastic albums together and having to pick which one is better. Definitely, like, I don't know, it's a very, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's a great album. Like, in terms of their funk rock sort of era, it's their best, easy peasy. Like, just the out there back half of like with like them sampling shit like, I mean, going from a fucking hardcore punk track to like Tibetan throat singing on Shambhala and Bodhisattva Vow is fucking nuts, and I
Honestly.
love it. And like all the other golden era Beastie Boys records, it's got its fair share of bangers, like Sure Shot, B-Boys Making with the Freak Freak, Root Down, Sabotage, Get It Together, Bodhisattva Vow. It's all there. I feel like a broken record when I'm saying this, but yeah, it does feel a little bit bloated, especially around Eugene's Lament. But I mean, I don't know. What can you do? Yeah, but it's a great record. Sorry about that. No, but and the music videos that go along with the songs too, like the classic Sabotage music video, it's fucking fantastic. Spike Jonze is a wonderful director too. But yeah, there's nothing else that I can really say about this record other than it's fantastic and definitely a highlight to their career.
Hell yeah.
I went with Paul's Boutique. An incredible album. I'm gonna, preface this by saying that. And yeah, I think the project really expanded on the prowess in the production department tenfold when compared to their debut. And the album's status as one of the most impressively produced albums in hip hop history is most certainly deserved. The production is absolutely magical, created entirely out of samples, and the band just blends everything perfectly. And it's like a big, massive, convoluted, almost hip hop potion, and with just the most grandest spectrum of just samples and genres and influences all put into one melting pot, and the result is just absolutely fantastic, the best one could expect. The compositions are combined together so well that it's hard to believe that everything on here is a sample at some points, and it definitely did more than any other project in the early hip-hop era to bring Plunderphonics to where it is today. The production isn't the only department where the band really improved heavily. Their flows and performances as rappers are a lot more fluent, more vibrant, and quite frankly more interesting than under debut. The immature and predicting bars are just long gone. What we get is just the band's signature tongue-in-cheek, just fun, exciting, aesthetic, in a more complex than dynamic way. That being said, though, I do think this album isn't quite perfect. I have little to no complaints when it comes to the production here, obviously, but the trio's dynamic still sometimes tends to kind of overwhelm what, in my opinion, is just fantastic production, and a lot of times, more mellow, more intricate production just kind of gets lost behind bars that are just a little too in your face for me. That's obviously what the Beastie Boys are. And it's really just my personal preference that kind of lets me down here. But when things work, and they work most of the time here, it's just unmatched fun. Shake Your Rump is a prime example, but tracks like What Comes Around, for example, are just a little more mindless in my opinion. That being said, I mean, I do love this project. I do see where a lot of this project's praise comes from. It's not really, a stretch to say it's one of the best produced hip-hop albums of all time. And yeah, I think it's a great album. I just have one that I definitely prefer.
Shake Your Rump disrespect will not be tolerated. Fucking hell.
I said Shake Your Rump is a banger. I
thought you meant that.
What comes... Yeah, I was.
Okay,
that was an example of a great track.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I was fucking worried there for a second. I was like, okay, what fucking drugs are you smoking?
No, I said What Comes Around is a little uninteresting.
Okay, we'll keep you in the bass department. Okay. Anyways, my favorite tracks from Ill Communication are Sabotage, Get It Together, and Futterman's Rule. My least favorite track is Heart Attack Man.
Oh wait, May, you can go. Or Aubrey,
Oh, yeah, you're good. My favorite tracks from Ill Communication are Sure Shot, B-Boys Making with the Freak Freak, Root Down, Sabotage, Get It Together, Do It, and Bodhisattva Vow. And my least favorite is Heart Attack Man, I guess.
Heart Attack Man.
My favorite tracks on Paul's Boutique are Shake Your Rump. Do you hear that, Mick?
Yes, I hear that. You're staying in the bass department, okay? God.
Hey Ladies and Shadrach. My least favorite track is What Comes Around. What Comes Around.
All right. Number 1 in our lists, and of course it wasn't obvious already, my number 1 is Paul's Boutique.
My number 1 is Ill Communication.
My number 1 is Pollywog Stew. No, it's Paul's Boutique.
Fuck yeah. Alright, first and foremost, there is no fucking way that an album like this could ever be made today by well-known artists. The amount of fucking lawsuits and bullshit you'd have to deal with are insane. Anyways, yeah, Paul's Boutique is my favorite Beastie Boys album, and it's one of the most impressive albums to have ever been made during hip-hop's golden era. And when you think of that era, there were like so many influential artists that changed the game forever, like Rakim, A Tribe Called Quest, Public Enemy, NWA, and of course the Beastie Boys, the latter of which did that with this album in particular, and I honestly see it as one of the most influential and important hip-hop albums of all time, because it really pushed the boundaries of what hip-hop sampling could be as an art form, and even outside of that, it's genuinely just a fantastic album. On release, the album was seen as a commercial failure since License to Ill was such a massive hit, but since the album took this huge spike in praise and acclaim... Wait, no, hold on, I read that wrong, okay. Since then the album was given like a huge spike in praise and acclaim, and that acclaim is deserved because this album is amazing in every sense of the word. To get the big cliche statement out of the way, the fact that a hip-hop album that sounds this dense with its samples came out in 1989 is insane to me. It's so ahead of its time, and with what it tried to achieve, it achieves it successfully, and on that merit, it's also just a fun and fantastic album. Excuse me. The Beastie Boys do carry over the absurdity and goofiness of their personalities while also coming through with much better flows. They come through with the same chemistry that makes Beastie Boys who they are, and in turn they add a lot to the catchiness and the fluidity that these tracks needed. For how much is packed into these tracks, they managed to craft a lot of fun moments on here due to that chemistry and personality. The big selling point of the album, of course, is the production, if it wasn't obvious. After ditching Rick Rubin and Def Jam, the Beastie Boys decided to hire the Dust Brothers to produce this album. They're also known for producing Beck's Odelay and making the Fight Club soundtrack. And I just gotta take my metaphorical hat off and say that the Dust Brothers are fucking geniuses for what they were able to offer on this album. It is simply groundbreaking. There are layers upon layers upon layers of samples on this album, and it's all produced immaculately. It still sounds fresh to this day, and the way these samples form around each other to create something this consistently exciting is unbelievable, and each instrumental complements the song ideas and what the Beasties were trying to do so well. The diversity in Paul's Boutique sampling is another aspect to what I love. The sounds it explores from a wide range of genres are, in there, like, are just insane, like hard rock, funk, punk, psychedelic rock, jazz, and there's even samples from artists like Curtis Mayfield, Johnny Cash, Mountain, and they even have 4 Beatles songs on the same song. Like, man, every sample in here is utilized like so well, and there's not more I could ask for outside of that. Performance-wise, the boys fucking kill it. It has some of the best performances in their entire discography. It's my opinion, it's the best produced Beastie Boys album. Some of my favorite Beastie Boys songs are on this album. I still fondly remember the first time I ever heard Shake Your Rump when Eli ×4, shouts to Eli, told me to listen to it. I went fucking livid in that voice chat. Oh my. In a good way. I love the way it ends with the kind of the last stretch of B-Boy Booyah Best Sweet tracks, which has grown on me so much since I first heard it. Yeah, I've went on for too long. I'll let you guys talk in a sec. All in all, it's an album I don't think I'll ever get enough of. It's one of my favorite hip-hop albums ever. It's certainly one of the best hip-hop albums of the 80s. And for all the acclaim it gets, it absolutely deserves it because it shows in the sheer quality of the music and with how groundbreaking it is. I love it. It's a blast to listen to. And it's the best thing the Beastie Boys have ever made, in my opinion. And with that in mind, rest in peace to MCA.
Mm-hmm.
Rest in peace, MCA.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, but I can't praise this album enough. Like, this album is what I would consider would be thrown into a genre that I made up called musical gumbo. It sounds like a mishmash of... It's like a musical guacamole of every conceivable music genre thrown into this densely packed 50 to 60 minute album. And it sounds fucking phenomenal. Like, the Dust Brothers, I mean, obviously I've been on this podcast enough to know, like, for you guys to know that I'm, like, you know, a musician, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to toot my own horn, blah, blah, blah. But the Dust Brothers are such a huge influence to me in terms of, you know, the genre of plunderphonics and just hip. I am talking. I am talking.
How rude.
Interrupting. Oh my goodness. Anyways, just... I'm so sorry.
I mean, I'm sorry, but they're spitting facts.
they really are spitting mad facts right now, honestly.
Oh my god. Anyways, just... The production on this thing is nuts. From the opening, Shake Your Rump... I mean, not the opening, but from the first actual song, Shake Your Rump, to Eggman, to the absolute, like, probably my favorite tribute to the Beatles, which is Sounds of Science.
Yes.
To 3 Minute Rule, Hey Ladies. Even they sample the fucking Deliverance soundtrack on 5-Piece Chicken Dinner, which is probably, like, I don't know, one of the funniest things on that album, except for, like, mind the one bar, and I think it's 3 Minute Rule. Either that or High Plains Drifter, which is something sucking your mama's, you know. But it's a fucking fantastic album. Like, and shouts out to AOTY as well, honestly, because very different style of music, but similar production. Obviously, because it's by the Dust Brothers, but these guys are just, like Mick said, they're fucking geniuses when it comes to crafting beats. Just incredible stuff. And I can't get enough of it. I honestly, after this, I'm probably going to bump this up to a 10.
Ooh.
Just because it's that fucking good. And one of my all-time favorite hip-hop albums, especially, probably my favorite hip-hop album from the 80s. It's so much goddamn fun. And I wish I had even a sliver of the talent from any of the Dust Brothers. But I'll turn the mic over to Nostalgia and see what he has to say about ill communication.
I got the ill communication.
I got the ill communication.
I think, Mick, you said this exact thing. It's also in my notes. This album does feel like Check Your Head Part 2. At least when it comes to the band's approach on here. This album is eclectic, it's playful, it's seldom overbearing, and oftentimes a little more intriguing and hypnotic than most of what the band have done up to this point. And the wide variety of styles and influences here are again done absolute justice by the trio. The jazz aspects in particular really stand out, but in general the sound of this album is really ever changing, ever evolving, and quite hard to pin down. It's an exercise in some of the slickest and most inspired production in 90s hip hop, and it's an absolute powerhouse of bangers on every single corner. Sabotage captures the aggression of the band's debut in a far more mature manner and is quite obviously the standout track here, but the highlights are almost never ending. The album to me is just everything that I personally would have wanted in a Beastie Boys album. It's unmistakably them, yet it's so perfectly balanced in its explorations and experimentation that it's just an album that is full of class, charisma, charm on every corner, and the soundscapes that it presents just, again, are ever changing, always throwing curveballs at you. It's an absolute blast to listen to, and I don't think it has a single dull moment.
Well, I'll be damned. Holy Jesus. Alright, so with that in mind, my favourite tracks from Paul's Boutique, I could say a shitload, but I've narrowed it down to the three. Shake Your Rump, The Sounds of Science, and Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun. My least favourite track, if I had to pick, would be 3 Minute Rule.
My favorite tracks off Paul's Boutique are Shake Your Rump, Eggman, Sounds of Science, 3 Minute Rule, Hey Ladies, Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun, Shadrach, and B-Boy Boy Bass. And if I had to pick, if somebody put the barrel of a gun up to my head and told me I had to pick my least favorite track, I would probably say High Plains Drifter, just because the moaning and shit just kind of makes me uncomfortable.
Understandable.
But it's a good song other than that. So.
Ooh,
Nostalgia?
We did it. Brain.
Caught you off guard.
My favorite tracks are Sabotage, Get It Together, and Futterman's Rule, and I do not have any least favorites.
We caught you out, get fucked, idiot. Get fucked, idiot.
Oops.
Brain go whoosh. Alright.
Just tend to do that.
It's another certified Mickey brain rot moment.
That wasn't me.
Wasn't me.
Wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the brain rot moment.
Wasn't
Nostalgia
me.
did.
Oh, well then this
Wasn't
is a
me.
certified nostalgia brain rot moment.
You know what, we'll just call him a trademark.
Why are you so riggedy raw?
Huh?
Why are you so riggedy raw?
Why am I so riggedy roo-ah?
Yeah.
I don't know. Why are you so riggedy roo-ah? John, I'm doing something right now. Please get out of my...
Let me show.
Oh my god.
We can
Okay,
cut
fine.
this out, don't worry.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. He's just being chill.
Is it
All
good
right,
content?
so
Is it good
Yeah.
content?
yeah,
Alright.
I think that's it. We got it.
Alright, we did it. Alright.
we
We
did
did
it.
it.
We can cut this out if you want.
It's fine. You don't have to. He adds personality to it.
Okay. Shout outs to John.
Shouts
Shout
out
outs
to
to
John. Shouts out to Cringe Gang. Shouts out to Narcosis. We have an album dropping soon.
Yeah.
Hells yeah. Aubrey, thank you so much for coming back on.
Absolutely. It
you.
was a pleasure to be on.
Speaking of which,
Pleasure to have ya.
speaking of Aubrey, once again, shout outs to our patrons, Aubrey, Joshua, and Conor. And yeah, of course, like Aubrey mentioned, Narkosis have an album dropping soon. That's her duo with Eli Times 4. They dropped an album earlier this year, which is actually one of my favorites of the year, so you should definitely give that a listen. And yeah, new music on the way from them as well. We really hope you get to check them out. So yeah, with that in mind, necessary links in the description will be to me and Nostalgia's own individual YouTube channels, our Patreon, and the Discord server. Check out some of our other content as well, including more episodes of the Taped Podcast and some other stuff outside of that. Tune into the live streams too, and yeah, with that in mind, my name's MickyT.
I'm Nostalgia.
Bye.
And I exist.
Oh.
Goodbye.
I was waiting for something to pause it so long.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
All right. See you later.